to this meeting. Today's topic is Stakeholder Safari, herding cats and winning cards. So please expect this session to last till roughly 8 p.m., leaving some time for Q&A at the end. Before we go any further, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Kikwa First Nation, Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Swasin First Nation, and Kwikwen and Stalu Nation. We thank them for allowing us to meet and learn together on their territory. Please mute your devices as we will be recording this event. But you are encouraged to turn on your camera. We'd love to see all your faces. And as Alienka mentioned, please rename yourself to your full name so we know who you are, and you'll receive your due credits. And I'd like to touch on our chapter mission and vision. Our vision is to lead BA practitioners in mainland BC. And as far as our plan to do that is, we're working to advance the role of business analysis and promote the value provided by these professionals. We aim to support professional development by providing access to forums, discussion groups, study sessions, webinars, speaker presentations, and workshops such as this one. We also try to support BA practitioners with IIBA certifications by providing access to information and training programs relating to the business analysis body of knowledge. And last but not definitely least, we strive to build our community and by encouraging knowledge sharing through networking and social events with fellow BA professionals across a range of industries and companies. And some chapter awards. We were the chapter winner in 2019, 2020, and 2022. We are proud to have won these awards, and we thank all of our volunteers who worked so hard to have made this possible. Additionally, in 2024 and 2025, we were nominated and were finalists for Chapters of the Year. Again, thanks to our volunteers who worked so hard to have made this possible, and thanks to all of you guys for showing up to our meetings. And our Volunteer of the Year for 2025 was none other than our own president, Sid Arya. So a big congratulations for him. He works very hard for this branch, and we're very grateful to him. And just a reminder that all our sessions are posted to our YouTube channel after they happen. So make sure to go over there and check it out. I believe the link will be dropped in the chat box. Make sure you subscribe and also turn on notifications to never miss any of our sessions. And a big thank you to our sponsors who help support us and make sessions like this possible. And now I'd like to invite, if we have any of them here, to share, starting with UBC. If we have anyone from UBC, if they'd like to share any words for both of them.
Vladimir, do we have any of our sponsors here right now?
I don't think that any of the sponsors is here tonight. Actually, Karen is on vacation. This from BCIT, our contact is on vacation. So, yeah, SFU also are not able to come. So I don't think. Maybe Works ABC. I'm not sure. I didn't hear from them.
Okay. All right. If anyone comes up later, please let us know. Adit, I think we can proceed at this point.
Sure. So then again, thank you to them for making this possible. So then moving on, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker, Banu Raghuraman. Banu Raghuraman is a product management professional with over 15 years of experience in this industry. She has a strong foundation in engineering, business, data, and has dabbled in different roles with leading teams and strategic insight and technical expertise. She is also a recognized public keynote speaker, having delivered engaging talks on AI, product strategy, emerging tech, and career growth at international conferences and webinars. She values bidirectional learning and believes deeply in helping others realize their potential. And now, I'd like to pass it over to our speaker to continue.
Thank you so much, Adit, for that introduction. Every time introductions take place, if you guys are fans of Seinfeld, I get reminded of that scene where George is trying to introduce himself for the apartment, and he summarizes his life. And he's like, oh, that doesn't sound that bad. That's what I feel like every time there's an introduction. So thanks again. It has been a wonderful journey professionally, and I'm glad to kind of give back to the community as well. And that's one of the biggest plus points for me when I interact with a lot of these groups, And I know I'm presenting to the IIBA audience, and I've put on the slide as a product enthusiast. And what I wanted to clarify is that I did start off as a BA, and I went through IIBA. I'm a certified business analyst professional as well. But what I realized is that the skills that you learn as a BA, they are so transferable that you can move into any role. And one of the primary reasons why I liked moving into the product space was just because there was a lot more technical hands-on exposure as well that I was getting. So it just felt like a natural move towards there. My background is also in UX design. So a lot of the concepts that I learned in UX design and user experience just naturally flowed into the product space. That's often a question that a lot of people ask me when I'm making or when I'm delivering presentations to the BA community as well. And I thought I'll get that out of the way. But that being said, a very interesting topic today at hand, Stakeholder Safari. This is something that I've grappled with from the beginning of my career. What I've found is that there are so many skills that as BAs we kind of learn. So if you've seen the BABOK, there's a lot of skills that they refer to. There's a lot of different frameworks that we work with. However, one of the things that I've noticed about stakeholder management in general is that regardless of how many years you are in this space, there's always something new for you to learn. Because unlike systems and technology, humans have a lot of variation in terms of their personality, their behavior, their lived experiences, the background they bring. There's just so much variety that humans bring into the picture. And because of that, no matter how much you learn, there's always more to learn. But the only thing that remains constant is your openness and your ability to kind of handle those situations. And that's what I think differentiates a seasoned business analyst professional versus someone who's new to the game. Doesn't mean that they don't have any skills, but it's just one of those things that you have to kind of learn as you grow. It's a very, very experiential type of skill that you have to learn on the job rather than read some textbooks and understand some theory. But that said, we will be covering some theoretical aspects as well, because that does help in your understanding of the world and how things go. And with that, let's begin. Just a couple of things. I cannot see everybody because I'm working off just one screen here. So if there is something, please feel free to raise your hand up, and I think I'll get a notification if you do. Or if one of the hosts want to interrupt me, please feel free to do so. But as Adit said, we're also going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you want to save your questions for later by typing them into chat, that is also an option. But either way, let's keep it organic. And I'd love to hear from you. As I said, this is a topic that people learn from experience. So the more we share with each other, the more we will learn and grow as a community rather than just being a very unidirectional me talking to you type of session. So I'm hoping this would be an interactive session. And with that, let's go to the next slide if my system decides to cooperate with me. Try this. All right. So the first thing I wanted to cover is just some basic ground rules. I'm hoping everyone who has been a BA before or has worked in any kind of job, right? Stakeholder management is one of those things that you don't have to wait until you become a BA or a PM or whatever role you want to be in. Even if you have worked at Target, even if you have worked at Zellers, even if you have worked at, Walmart as a cashier, as someone who is an associate or someone who has been walking around on the floor, helping with customer service, whatever the role may be, dealing with people, meeting with people, working with them. If you've had a manager at any point in your life, in any summer job, in any day job, any full-time job, part-time contract, or whatever the case may be, you have worked with a stakeholder. So when you go into a room, when you're starting a job, do not go in with this mindset that, oh, I've never done this before, right? We all, as long as you've dealt with a human being who's someone outside of your family, and even sometimes I think even within family, you are dealing with stakeholders, like your mom and dad are stakeholders, your siblings are stakeholders. You're all living in the same household and you have to kind of share certain things. You have to understand things about each other so you don't, kill each other or piss each other off. So whatever the case may be, always go in with a positive mindset that you have had some experience in the space. You know what humans are like, and you know that there are certain things that you need to understand. Mapping that over to the work environment or a professional environment, Every different project that you'll work with, it's gonna bring out different aspects of challenges for you. And at the same time, it will also help you uncover a little bit about yourself. What I have personally realized is that in my journey, when I was in the beginning of my career, I liked a boss that gave me a set sense of direction, like someone who would work with me on frameworks because I was fresh out of school and I didn't necessarily understand what the professional world was like. So at that point in time, the more my boss was like a mentor, the more they were open to teaching me things, the more they were open to having a conversation with me. I really liked that. I really enjoyed that. And someone who looked out for opportunities and kind of gave me the pathway to not just do my work, but also grow myself as a person. I really enjoyed that. But as time has gone by, I've realized that I've moved up a little bit in seniority, of course. And the way my bosses will interact with me is not necessarily going to be the same way that my boss interacted with me when I started my job, right? I have evolved. My needs have evolved. How I am managed are evolved. So apply that and transpose that into your stakeholder management as well. Depending on the layer of organization that you're dealing with, everything is going to be different. Depending on your own journey of your life, if you are a starting professional versus a mid-career professional versus a senior professional, you're going to have different styles of working with different people, and you are evolving as well. So it's not just a singular dimension of, oh, I'm working with this other person who is my manager. So the whole concept of manager and who you are, those two are not static positions. They constantly keep moving. So often in stakeholder management, we think about the other side, but we don't necessarily realize how we have evolved because we just think, oh, I'm still like even today, I was thinking to myself, I sit down, I exercise like I feel like I'm 15, but my body knows it's not 15 anymore. So there's always this disconnect between how we perceive ourselves and how we actually are. And we'll talk a little bit about that as part of Q&A as well, because that again is a very interesting topic for me, is how you kind of evolve and build yourself up for these interactions as well. So to start off at the base, you've got these three tools that I'm hoping everyone has kind of interacted with them at some point in your life. Stakeholder maps, right? So these are the maps that you would kind of map out all your different stakeholders. You would identify who are the people who are sort of influential. Maybe when you're starting off, this is not too obvious for you, but RACI kind of drives you towards that as well. So who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be I forget what consulted, and the last one is who's just interested, right? FYI. But either way, as you work with these stakeholders, you start realizing who influences who, right? So even at home, you would be like, my sister and I, we had this thing when we were growing up. My mom was a big fan of chocolates, and my dad was a big fan of electronics. So between my sister and I, we kind of knew who would influence who on what topic, right? So if we wanted chocolates, we would go straight to mom and we would be like, hey, mom, can you get us chocolates, right? My dad would be like, why would you want chocolates? You know, it's bad for you. It's not healthy. And he would actually stop us. But my mom had enough influence over my dad to get chocolates for us. But vice versa, if we wanted like the latest phone or something else that we needed for school, if it was electronics, my mom would be like, oh, this is such a waste of money because the electronics is going to change like in 5 years. Back in the day, you know, things used to change much more slower. But she would be like, why would we waste money on this? Whereas my dad would be like, no, let's go get it. It's a cool stuff that's coming out. We should all experience what that is. So understanding your sphere of influence and understanding that, hey, you know, mom was better than dad in this area or dad is better than mom in that area, our mental state biologically kind of starts quite early, right? And now we can map that to work as well. So if you know that there are certain stakeholders who are much more open to, say, AI related stuff, you kind of want to approach them and help them influence the rest of the team using their influential circles and whatever tips and techniques they would use. Similar sort of concept in power and interest grids as well. There are people who have extreme or a lot of power over your project, but they may not actually have a lot of interest in your project because they might have bigger things to chew or bigger things to work on. There might be people who are super interested in your project, but you know they might be absolutely powerless in terms of turning the direction in terms of how and what you need to do. A very simple example here is, for example, if you are buying a new tool or an application, an enterprise-wide application, think of something like a CRM, or you are thinking of an employee accounting system of some sort. The actual people who are interacting with the software, for example, if it's CRM, you can imagine your sales agents, you can imagine your customer support people, they're actively using your platform. They have high interest in your platform because they are the ones who are going to be impacted on a day-to-day basis, depending on how well that system works. But do they have the power to make a decision? Not necessarily. They're not the ones paying for the project. They're not necessarily defining the timelines as to when it should be implemented. They're not necessarily helping you resolve blockers and things like that, but they can give you ample information on how they actually use this tool and what is important for them when it comes to CRM. Flip the other side of the coin, think about a CFO or a CTO or someone who's in the C-suite who is actually paying for this. They have the power to scrap this project altogether. They can come down to you one day and be like, hey, I think we're having budget overruns or cost overruns. We're going to put this project on hold, right? And that's their power. But their interest in the project, even though they're interested, their level of interest is not as same as, say, someone who's a customer support agent or a sales agent who uses that application day in, day out. And then between the two of them, you might have even a third stakeholder who has absolutely no power, or they may have marginal power, and they have some interest in what happens, right? So think about like a cybersecurity expert in your company. Do they have the power to turn your project around? Yes, they probably do. Because if they say a certain platform is not safe, or if they say it's not really secure, it might actually shut down the project depending on how big the risk is. But if they were to come to you and say, hey, I think Salesforce is very average. Why don't we try HubSpot? That is not necessarily going to change your direction unless they give you a specific requirement in saying that, hey, do you think one is more safer than the other? If not, then you don't really have a lot of say in this project because you're not paying for it and you're not the one being, impacted by it from a day-to-day perspective. At the same time, do they have interest? They probably do because they want to make sure that the system doesn't expose any risk for the organization. So you've got like those different categories, and all of them are sort of on a spectrum, right? Depending on where they fall, you kind of understand where they are in that power interest grid. And lastly, the RACI chart. That's just something that we all use. I think this is a very frequently, and there are lots of simple versions of it too. It doesn't have to be exactly in this format, but again, it's a very simple tool that is quite useful. One new dimension that I would recommend if you are using RACI charts that I've kind of found useful kind of comes as part of the communication plan. But we have to realize that in this day and age, we have a large generational divide in terms of like our oldest employee to our youngest employee. What I mean by that is if we think about the finances and the economics of the situation right now, a lot of people who probably wanted to retire and stop working probably haven't done that. Or there are people who come back because there's just so much interesting stuff that's going on in the market that I've actually seen people who retired and they were like 70 something who was super interested in technology. They actually came back to work. And at the same time, you've got younger and younger generation that's entering the market with AI. People just go for a boot camp. They really understand how it works and they're really good at it too. Like this is not a comment on their skill set, but when you think about the age that they enter the workforce, they're entering earlier and earlier. So along with RACI, one of the things that you need to think about as well is the communication style for these people. I've worked with a C-suite executive who just refused to even come on camera when we went into the COVID scenario because we were all working remotely. And she was like, I will not open my camera because someone can hack into it, even though it was an office laptop. And she was probably the first and the only person who rang my desk phone. For me, the desk phone was just an accessory, or I would make external calls using that. But apart from that, in my day-to-day job, I never had that phone ring, and she was the first one who made the call through that desk phone. So that was her communication style. Whereas when you think about someone who's younger generation, I have managed some folks who would complete the entire project just through chatting. They've never shown up on any video calls. I never had to jump on a call and explain things to them. We never had any screen shares or what happening. He would just record a demo on his end. He'll send the demo to me and be like, is this correct? And I would look at the demos like, yes, it's correct, right? So sometimes when you are in this stakeholder management role and you're kind of working with extreme spectrum in your generations of folks in your team, this might be another dimension to add into your RACI chart as well, because that again is going to, kind of impact how you're communicating. Because if this is someone who is super accountable, but the only way they communicate to you is through a desk phone, then you have to make sure that your communication plan accommodates for that. And you also understand what kind of stakeholder this is going to be and how you're going to be interacting with them, right? So it's just a new dimension that I want to share because I've run into this scenario before, and I wanted to share that experience. I do want to play a quick video. So in all the slides, I have a little snippet of something that you can learn from popular media and so on and so forth. Let me know if you cannot hear the audio, and we'll try to fix that.
Hello, Jacob here.
Hi Jacob, this is Dale from Finance here. I just wanted to let you know on the quiet that you might need to speak to Anne on the help desk. She's very unhappy about the way your project is going.
Oh, well, thanks for letting me know, Dale. I'll speak to her soon. Hello, Jacob here.
Hi Jacob, it's Stephen here. I'm the GM's EA. I just wanted to let you know that Anne is extremely pleased with your progress to date.
Anne? And the help desk manager, Anne?
Yeah, she's been telling us how well you've been doing.
Oh, thanks for that. What the heck? I'm going to speak to Anne, whoever that is.
Hello, Anne speaking.
Hi, Anne. It's Jacob from Project Endeavour. I wanted to chat to you about how's it going.
Who? I've never heard of you or your project. What do you have to do with the help desk?
I hope not many of you have run into that situation whereby your stakeholder and other stakeholders have different ideas of what's actually happening in the project, not knowing who you are and things like that. But this is a very common occurrence that is amplified, of course, in the video that basically says how if you don't have regular touch points with your stakeholders, if you don't regularly have those relationships, everyone has a different view of how the project is going, but what is the actual truth? No one really knows until they come together. So this is just impressing the importance of why you need to be close to your stakeholders and why you need to build those relationships and have a realistic view about how your project itself is going. All right, let's go to the next slide here. All right, so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how we leverage empathy, right? And this is something that I published a little essay about empathy in leadership. And I have found that increasingly over time, this is the one thing that is going to be distinguishing people who work at their relationships and have better connections as well. And the reason for that is empathy really opens up a part of your brain, a part of your heart, a part of your mind that previously might have been closed because of which you take either bad decisions or you don't really understand what's happening. And that lack of perspective changes your approach and the way you implement the solution as well. So one of the things that I want you to take away from this conversation is how can you be more empathetic in terms of your role in your respective projects as a BA. So this goes without saying, right? If you have worked with someone who's empathetic versus someone who is not as much, your interaction and your experience with that person changes greatly, right? There's also a saying that says, you don't really change jobs, you change managers. And what is it, that unique aspect that, is really good with certain managers, right? It's because they work with you with a lot of empathy. They really understand what you need. Like I was giving my own example, when I started my career and I was in the beginning stages of my life, I needed a boss who was able to walk me through a lot of aspects, not just my job, but also things like, hey, how do I get promoted to the next level? I had heard about these things on the internet, but how does it practically work? And even within that specific organization, there might be nuances that you are not really familiar with, but you will need to learn if you were to progress further. So understanding that aspect made a huge difference for me in terms of my experience when I was working with that boss. I still go around saying that he was my favorite boss and he was the best ever. And the reason was that because he understood what I needed and he was able to, and I communicated as well, right? So it's not a one-way street. So unless you say and you ask for something, you get 50% chance of getting something that you have asked for, but you get 0% of getting something you never asked for, right? So always take that chance and be vocal and voice out what you need. So the research on the left-hand side, it's pretty self-explanatory in saying that if you are working with empathy, then you've got better output, you've got better job satisfaction, your conflicts also tend to be resolved in a better way. Simply because you are actually understanding someone's perspective and you're bringing in multiple ideas instead of just imposing your own idea on someone else. So at this point, it's not just a nice to have anymore. It's something that people expect you to have. And that too, when you think about this age of AI, anyone can solve a technical situation. Like you pump in a few prompts into AI and that's going to give you the answer. So from a technical expertise, it's not that your technical expertise is no longer valid, but that's not going to add the additional value of you in the team because someone can just go to a ChatGPT or Gen AI and just type in the question and get it. What is going to be different is how you position the human side of things. How do you bring in humanity to your projects? How do you bring in that empathy? And how do you help people understand the other perspective across the table? And again, these might be pretty obvious to you if you've been in a senior position so far in your career, but do practice some of these techniques. I know empathy sometimes may not be something that comes natural to you, and I have worked with people who are on the spectrum. So if they're on a neurodivergent spectrum, some of these things are foreign concepts to them, not because they choose to be difficult, but that is just how their brain works, right? And that is a bit difficult. And again, if you play that situation with empathy as well, you will be able to find out how to best utilize them and best use them on the project and not have them as an outcast just because people don't really understand what they need or how they function. So first of all, active listening. Listening versus hearing things are different. If your ears are working, everyone can hear. But are you actively listening? Are you able to process what the person is saying? How many times do you interrupt somebody? And I'm hugely guilty about this because what happens is sometimes when they're talking, my brain is processing something to counter what they're talking about, or it gets another idea and I end up interrupting somebody. So I have to actively take steps. So what I do now is that I take notes on the side, I write my note down and I keep listening to the person. And then when they're done, that's when I say, hey, I have a few questions. You said this, what about this? What about this? What about this? And that has improved my conversation so much because now I'm letting the other person speak what they have to deliver. And likewise, I get mutual respect back, right? I don't get interrupted. And I'm able to converse what I need to converse as well. Reflective paraphrasing. So what I think I'm hearing from you is, that's a very classic phrase that you can use to make sure that you have really understood what the other person is saying in a clear, concise way, or in a way that you understand. So that way, both of you are kind of exchanging your ideas. And last but not the least, emotional awareness. I think this is becoming more and more challenging as people are working remotely and you're working in, different located teams. So some of them are in the country, some of them are not in the country. You're working with cross-cultural norms. Things can be happening in people's lives. Often back in the day, it was just like, oh, someone is not well and therefore they didn't show up to work. And you're just like, okay, they're taking a day off. But now that's not the case. Even if people are sick, they end up logging in at home because I'm tired of sleeping. I don't really want to lose another sick day because I might need it for something else. So people end up logging in. So if they're not, responsive on a certain day, or they could be having something really tough going on with their life. And these things are really hard to understand the undercurrents, but be more aware, just try, right? And these things, sometimes you just have to try it out and see what is the best way someone responds. And be aware that it's not something personal, because often what happens is when we kind of center ourselves in the conversation as opposed to the situation that's happening, we end up thinking that, oh, it's all about ourselves. It's all about me and they're just being mean to me or rude to me and so on and so forth. So very important to kind of understand that difference. Now let's jump into a popular culture. This is one of my favorite series that I watched, but a lot of things to take away from this snippet.
You've been a legal secretary.
24 years this spring.
You good at what you do?
I'm great at what I do.
Then you start tomorrow.
Mr. Spector, I wanted to
You're still here?
I don't leave until you leave.
Well, in that case, what time is my meeting with Adidas?
11:15.
Did you line up?
Buyers? I did, but not for another week. Nike and Puma overseas, and you said Reebok didn't matter if the other two can't be there.
God Damn it.
There's one more thing.
What difference does it make? I can't delay the sale if I don't know why my client is dumping his company on a whim.
That's the one more thing. Mr. Doyle's best friend died a month ago. He was 46.
How'd you know that?
When people say life is short 2 times in 30 seconds, it's usually right after somebody died.
Take it you were listening to our conversation.
That's what good secretaries do.
Sorry about the Keebler thing.
You didn't say it. Besides, it doesn't take Albert Einstein to figure out why you hired somebody who looked like me to replace somebody who looked like her.
Listen, Gretchen,
You don't have to worry about that with me. I prefer my men manly.
Am I not manly?
Well, if you have to ask.
How long?
So again, lots of undercurrents there, right? So it wasn't just about her doing her job, but also looking at a lot of the human aspects of things. So if you're managing your boss for certain things, making sure that they really get what they need and they are interacting with the right kind of people, and you're getting all this, I don't want to use the term gossip, but really it's the human side of why certain decisions are taken. What is someone's lived experience? What are they going through? It makes such a massive difference, right? Even though we try to keep our home lives and professional lives separate, it's hard for us as a human being not to bring over our emotions or not be affected by so many things that happen around us. So as a good stakeholder manager, or as someone who is interacting really well with people, you really have to make sure that you're understanding some of these aspects. It looks like there's a quick, yes, Suits is amazing. So I kind of like the way they started, but I have to say towards the end, it got very like dramatic and very unbelievable, but it was still a very good show. But yes, definitely. I agree with you there. All right, let's go to the next one. Apologize. It looks like my laptop is just not very fast today. So this is going to be our theoretical book section, if you will, about stakeholder management. Neuroscience is an area that I'm super interested in. My background is in industrial engineering, specifically user experience design, which was also engineering psychology. So I'm fascinated by how the brain works. And one of the reasons why I was interested in empathy as well, one of the reasons why psychology interests me as well. So understanding how people kind of behave, how they work, all those things, when you put that into your day-to-day job, that it makes you that much more human. It makes you that much more perceptive. And it also makes you that much more closer to solving a lot of things that would normally be unsolvable. Because like I said, human beings are generally a mystery because there's a lot of variety and there's a lot of things that drives us. So first of all, trust building and oxytocin. And all of these are names of different hormones. So the first one is oxytocin. With regards to this, what kind of actions and activities can you do to grow oxytocin? When you want to build trust with somebody, you have to be transparent and you have to be consistent. You have to let them believe that they can trust you. Of course, I'm not asking you to fake it, but you have to act in a way that this other person believes that you are on their side. If not on their side, at least have the openness that you will be democratic enough to listen to all sides of the conversation before you make a decision. So I don't necessarily go for like someone who is a people pleaser. That's not a good attitude to have, but you can be a diplomat, which means that you're listening to everyone's best reason and you still act in the way that is best for the project, right? So in this case, you're creating a psychological safety. People are not shying away from telling you things because they're like, oh, I don't know how this person is going to use this information, right? You're not building or contributing to the work toxicity that tends to happen in a lot of workplaces, and they're able to contribute these ideas freely to you. Some people who might not actually speak up in big crowds might still be open to talking to you while you talk to them in private or you have a separate conversation with them. I used to work in a political environment, like a political organization. And at that point, I still remember one of my first presentations that I did to the deputy minister. I had to go through 9 different presentations before that of the same deck because I was presenting that same deck to 9 different people to make sure I'm not stepping on anyone's toes. And at every point, it had to be sort of like, okay, I'm okay with you presenting this to my boss. I'm okay with you presenting this to my boss. I'm okay with presenting this to the boss, right? And I had multiple lines of business as well. So I had to kind of work with each one of them, make sure that they were okay with every I and every T that was crossed in that deck before it went to the deputy minister. Because at that point, everybody's, integrity was at stake. The next thing we're going to talk about is dopamine. And we talked about this one a lot, right? Because this is the one that kind of increases your motivation. It increases your energy. It increases your passion for life. And this is a hard one for us to kind of instill in other people in the project because often not everyone comes to work for the same purpose, right? You might be super excited to go to work because you seem to have a very cool part of the project. But someone else who might not be working for the sake of the excitement, they might just be going there to pay their bills. They might actually be at a deadbeat job that they wanted to get out of, but they're just stuck because maybe the market is bad. Maybe they have financial obligations. So this one is a really difficult one in terms of bringing that kind of energy onto the project. But at the end of the day, one of the areas that you can really tap into this piece is through change management. Whenever there are new changes that are coming in, this is when you will experience the maximum friction, right? People don't want to change. They don't hate the current process, but then they also hate change. And when that happens, people are like, okay, why do I have to do this, right? The other place where I've seen this play out really important is during conflicts. So whenever you run into a specific obstacle, you're like, oh my God, do I have to go through the privacy, legal, security checkpoint again? You know, they'll ask 1,000 questions and I won't have the answer to everything. And some things are just beyond my control. What am I going to do? And often this creates a lethargy within the project towards certain activities where people are like, I just don't like doing it. And instead of doing that as a stakeholder manager, if you are able to frame these opportunities as challenges or areas where they can grow upon, hey, I know we're going to go talk to security, legal, and privacy, but guess what? Maybe they'll find out some way for us to be more secure. They'll find out some way for us to minimize our risk. Here are all the things, but this is where they might actually knock it off because, you know, we have actually done this with other projects as well, and they were okay with it. Sometimes even market research helps. So for example, I'm not sure if I'll go through that example today. No, that example we're not going to go over today, but there's another Gen AI example that I share on one of my other talks, which is basically talking about vendor selection. And what I do in that prompt is to kind of understand what are some of the security risks that this specific platform was exposed to when it was worked with some of the other previous clients. And then I also try to look at another prompt which says, can you tell me what were some of the biggest exposures in the past 5 years that happened in this specific domain? And what was the penalty amount or the punishment that the company went through because this exposure happened? And when you have that sort of metric and you walk into a conversation with security, legal, and privacy, you are now arming yourself with ammunition, not in a bad way, but you know, you're arming yourself with arguments that you can place in front of them in a very logical way and saying that I get that you're saying we shouldn't be doing this, but this is what happened in the past and this is how the government reacted to it. Do you think the same thing will happen? How do you think we can mitigate this, right? Using this opportunity as something that you can learn from and grow from is so much different compared to looking at it as an obstacle or a challenge. So that way you reduce resistance and you create more excitement in terms of new knowledge and that growth mindset that all of us are striving to get into. And last but not the least, cortisol. This is the only hormone that you want to lower. You want high oxytocin, you want high dopamine, but you want low cortisol. For folks who are not familiar with cortisol, cortisol is also known as the stress hormone. So whenever you're stressed in your relationships, you're in depression, you're constantly worried about something, this is that ugly hormone that makes you, resistant to losing weight. It makes you lose your sleep. It spikes your sugar. It destroys your ability to process nutrients in your body. It makes your skin look older. All those bad things that you associate with like growing up because we're stressed about things naturally comes from cortisol. So in this case, very similar to what you were trying to do in oxytocin and cortisol are sort of the opposites here. The more you build trust, the more openness you build, the more trustworthiness you build, the more of the social component you focus on, the less of cortisol is going to be present as far as your project is concerned. Of course, you can't really change people's lives, but at least within the context of the project itself, you will be able to manage that better, whereby people don't feel as though they're being challenged or they're being put under stress or asked to do things that they don't really want to do, right? So that's going to build better resilient relationships for you. So again, walking into a room, this is another cool video that I want to play for you. Sorry, give me a second there.
How do you bring yourself into your best state of calm?
If you want to set the tone for the room, you got to set the tone internally. You warm up. What's my intent? Who's going to be in the audience? What am I trying to achieve? Intention is what triggers neural pathways to start firing. You set an intention, raise your hand. Well, I raised my hand. Well, how did that happen? I had an intention, made a decision, my hand raised. Same is true in where you're going. So for me, how I enter a room matters. I used to enter a room with a scowl, thinking that was tough. Then you realize that the true alpha energy is actually harmonious and smiles. And so I would enter a room and smile. Even if I didn't see somebody, I might point at them and just smile. It's dumb, but it gets me in the right position. It lets people see that I'm a welcoming individual. A lion doesn't need to roar. They just walk in and they can be harmonious. And that's the big misnomer where people think alpha is about dominating and protecting. It's about harmony. Great ideas don't matter if no.
So hopefully that gave you some insight into how you need to bring yourself into a room, right? Often we think about charisma, we think about someone who has that screen presence, someone who has that heavy set, like they come into the room and they're like, oh my God, they filled the room, right? So it's not about coming into the room with a scowl. You don't have to be an alpha person coming into the room. And recently, I think I read a research that basically debunked the whole alpha concept itself. They were talking about the lone wolf and so on and so forth, but wolves actually travel in packs. You don't necessarily have a lone wolf kind of character there. So the whole alpha wolf personality was debunked. But at the end of the day, what you are feeling inside is what ends up coming out, right? So going into a room, being more harmonious. And Simon Sinek, if you've heard of him, he talks a lot about this organizational behavior as well. And he made this comment about how, you're working with people 8 hours a day. Sometimes you're seeing them more than your own family members during weekdays and perhaps your entire working life. And at that time, you don't want to be working with jerks. So if you don't want other people to be a jerk, you need to come with a non-jerk personality as well. How do I actually work towards the betterment of the project? How do I work towards the betterment of the organization, the team that I'm working with? Not necessarily going in with someone who needs to control through fear, someone who needs to control through authority. That's not what we're looking for. When we think about the servant leadership concept that's coming these days, when we think about a lot of the roles which are influential, so you're leading through influence, not leading through power. Of course, you have the traditional matrices as well, whereby you're like, this person is your boss, and therefore you kind of have to listen to what they're saying. But when you're working in a project where you're comprised of all peers, you don't necessarily go in there with authority. You're going there with influence, and you're going in through negotiation. You're using all those principles that you need to make sure that all humans are sort of equal in that project, and you respect each other for that. All right. So, which leads into this, leading without authority. So you're leading with influence, you're leading with passion. Wharton actually published this. They had this 4-part influence formula, and these are the 4 things that they talk about, which we have kind of touched on with the previous slide about all the different hormones that we work with, right? So credibility is one. You have to have that integrity. Even if one of the classic examples here that I want to share is that you're sitting in a room and someone asks you, hey, what about this? And you don't know the answer for that. It might be a minor thing, but if you leave that room and you forget about it, you've just lost a chance for yourself to build that credibility in the sense that you don't think that client is important, or at least that's what they're going to extend that to, and saying that I asked a question, they didn't bother answering me, so therefore they must think that I'm not a very important person. Even if it's a tiny thing, or even if it's a tiny update, even if you didn't get the answer to it after the meeting, you can be like, hey, I haven't forgotten about this. Give me a couple more days. I'm following up with somebody else. I'll get back to you, right? Just a simple acknowledgement that they are there. There's this concept in African culture, which I don't remember the exact phrase for it, but it also came in Avatar, actually. If you watch the movie, it's a concept of I see you, right? It's not a question about, I'm listening to everything you're saying, or I'm your slave, or I'm listening to, like, I'm just a people pleaser, so I'll be happy with anything you do. But it's that acknowledgement of respect. It's the acknowledgement that I see that you are there. I see that you are my equal. I see that I need to respect you. I see you as another person in the project. That becomes so important in this concept of credibility and building that integrity. So that, I think, is something that resonates with me every time when I think about the word credibility, is that when you build that integrity with that person, you're basically telling them, I see you, meaning I value your opinion. I value who you are. I respect. I want you to be part of the project, and let's work on this together. Just 3 simple words. I see you, but it carries a lot of importance in terms of what you're presenting. Common ground. This goes without saying, right? There's a little story I want to say. It's a fun story, but I'll make it quick. One of the very first roles that I started with after my graduation, I was working with a boss who was sort of, a Canadian, right? By the way, I'm originally from Canada. I'm a Torontonian, but currently I'm based out of Seattle. But with this boss, he was super cool in terms of a lot of things. Very smart guy. But somehow I never found any common ground with him in the sense that I was relatively new immigrant. I had just been here for about 5 years. I'd just gone to university and then I graduated. So there was nothing common. Like I grew up in a different part of the world, so I knew nothing about his interests. And he was someone who had grown up locally, so he knew everything about this North American culture, the latest sitcoms and so on and so forth. My partner or the person that I kind of joined with, because we were hired together as a group, this other person on my team was just used to gel with my boss so well, right? And they used to have all these jokes and fun times. And I just thought that she was great at people communications and all that other stuff. Truth was, she also grew up here, so obviously that made a big difference. But it was also the fact that both of them bonded over Seinfeld. And that was one of the reasons why I started watching Seinfeld. So, when we started the conversation today, I gave an example about Seinfeld here. And the only reason I saw that was because maybe at some level I was jealous of the relationship that the other two had. And they were just sort of like, it's just part of popular culture here. And just knowing that just as, knowing sports euphemisms and knowing sports terminology makes a huge difference, right? Because we are talking about a male-centric sort of profession when you are in IT or any kind of technical roles. We're still trying to bridge the gap as women, but at the end of the day, when you have those conversations about sports, it just brings you that much closer to some of your stakeholders because, they talk about sports and they enjoy that a lot. But that being said, so common ground is basically working with empathy, trying to understand what are some of the common things you can build with this person, whether that be from a project perspective or personal perspective. Evidence ties back into your credibility aspect. So the more you are able to support what comes out of your mouth with your actions, with the data that you're going with, all that is going to build your brand image, right? You're going to be known as a person who really thinks through things. You'll come across as a person who has data-based evidence in what you're saying. Early on in my career, I was a super introvert, so I was very shy about talking. So the only thing I fell back on that used to help me was having data. And I was a bit of a nerd. I was good at Excel. So back in the day, whatever data I could get my hands on, I would whip up all these charts and provide them with supporting data and saying that, yes, this is what you need to do, right? And that built my brand in a certain way. Of course, I got better at stakeholder management. I got better in terms of my communication and so on and so forth. But even for a person who is extremely shy, what I'm trying to say out of this example is, even as an introvert, you have the power to make to influence someone. You have the power to change a decision simply because of the techniques that you're using, rather than taking a step back and saying, I'm not, built for this. And last but not the least, empathy, which I've barked about quite a lot. So hopefully these are the 4 techniques that you can kind of take away in terms of action. Now let's jump to another Suits example.
PowerPoint presentation.
I don't need a PowerPoint presentation.
Why is that?
Because every lawyer in the city has tried to dazzle you, and you're still looking for a date to the big dance because they don't know what you're looking for.
What exactly am I looking for?
Loyalty.
You're right. Built this company from the ground up. And everybody that started with me is still here.
And I know why. You don't downsize in the bad times. They stick with you in the good times, which is why I know you don't want me dumping you for a bigger client down the line.
How do I know you won't do that?
I'm glad you asked. Here's my PowerPoint presentation.
I have a hearing tomorrow against Fletcher Engines. You win that, you're my lawyer.
Of course, not all of us can be carrying around our yearbook to make sure that we are reflecting the genuineness of the clients that we're working with. But ultimately, what that video just shows you is that the more of your authentic behavior that you're able to build, and the more of that common ground that you build with the client or the stakeholder that you're working with, the better it's going to be. Because it's easier to work when things are out on the table, right? When you don't know what kind of hand the other person is hiding, that's when things become challenging. It's hard to trust. But when you have that openness, when you have that explicit value system that you're bringing together to the team, it becomes that much more easier. So again, it requires a little bit of vulnerability with a bit of caution in terms of who you're opening up to and what you're putting on the table when you're working with projects. But definitely, as you take some of these steps, people do soften, people do work better with you, people do want to build better relationships, right? And with that, let's go to the next. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So how do you manage some of the conflicting priorities? Again, I want to preface this by saying that this is, again, one of that dopamine aspect that we were talking about earlier, right? As soon as someone hears about conflict, they shy away. They don't want to deal with it. They could be avoidant in nature. If we look at some of the science behind conflicts and how people behave, there are different personalities even when you deal with conflicts. I don't know how many of you have heard about the 5 love languages. That is a very common theme when it comes to counseling for relationships. There's also the opposite about what are your conflict languages. So love languages, yes, how do you feel love from the other person? But at the same time, if a couple actually goes into a conflict, what are the things that they do to actually resolve that? How do you resolve conflict? Do you both avoid? Meaning you both are just quiet until the problem just goes away on its own, but it's somewhere just under having those undercurrents in you, it never feels resolved. Are you people that just, go at each other like fireworks, meaning you're just start like bombarding each other, but you don't really find a conflict, but you've just vented out whatever you need to? So that is also very important. So very similarly in your workplace as well, how do you manage some of these conflicts that come up, right? Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Always go into these negotiations with a proposal, right? What is the best thing that you can do? Then bridge competing goals, which means that if you know 2 people are going to be at 2 ends of the spectrum, try to find a common ground between the 2 of them and create multi-win scenarios. That means that, hey, yeah, we're creating this scenario, but look, you had 5 goals, but out of that, 3 of them are met. You have another option here. Out of 6, 2 of them were met. Which one do you want to go with? But the value is this on this, but this is a higher value. So going in with those options helps your stakeholders kind of see that, okay, you've done your work, right? And you have due diligence in making sure that this project is successful. And that's why you're going with this. One of the things that I ran into personally, again, this is an example from the political organization that I was with, is that 2 people in the team they basically hated each other. Anytime I brought them together into a room, either one of them left the room completely quiet, meaning they never spoke a word, and the other person would constantly speak. There was one time when I witnessed sparks between the 2 of them where they were just like, you can say whatever you want to say, but I'm not going to listen to you. And then they shut their laptop and they walked out of the room. And other meetings, both of them will be quiet and we would never get to resolving what we needed to resolve. So I realized that instead of bringing these 2 stakeholders into a room, might as well just talk to them separately, because clearly bringing them into a room wasn't doing anything. So I had to do a bit of groundwork, and I had to do a lot more upfront work in the sense that before I went into the meeting, I had to listen to everybody's viewpoints and kind of pick something that worked best for them. Then I had to take some time in massaging what the actual proposal was going to be. Like, what were the pros and cons of these multi-win scenarios that I was creating, right? Option A is this, option B is this, option C is this. And each one of them had pros and cons. And I would take that and then I would talk to each person separately. And you would be surprised how many times they landed on the exact same option when I spoke to them individually. Because at this point, they were not looking at an enemy across the table. They were just looking at facts that was presented to them on a piece of paper with pros and cons. And they could see that for the betterment of the project, a specific option worked well. And at the end of the day, I did still have to have some common meetings, but those meetings ended up becoming more like town hall meetings where I would be like, hey, this is the status update of the project. I hope all of you are on the same page. And then they walked out. There was no reason for them to interact with each other. There was no reason for them to talk to each other, and they just went away happy, right? So sometimes, yes, you will have to carry the weight of someone else's conflicts in the organization, but you just have to start becoming more and more creative, because at the end of the day, managing human beings is going to be a big part of who you are as a BA. The requirements writing and everything, AI is going to be able to do that, right? But the part where you need to manage human beings, AI is not going to be able to do that. And that's where you need to start getting more and more creative depending on who you're working with. One other note that I want to mention on this slide. It's a very counterintuitive approach, and I don't think a lot of people leverage this option, is building your champions. And what I mean by that is you don't have to fight every battle alone. As in when you're working with different stakeholders, identify those people who seem to be very supportive of you, number one. Number two, they really understand the goals of the project and they agree with you from a project perspective, and make them the evangelizers of what you're trying to do, right? So in this case, where I had to deal with two different stakeholders and I struggled, one of the stakeholders actually had a secretary who used to, handle all the administrative stuff for him. And she sort of became my close confidante and guide, if you will. So anytime I needed something, I would push certain things through her because she obviously was a trusted individual by her boss. So a lot of things that I had to plan for or get sign off on and things like that, I would send it through her instead of me directly going through. And she sort of became my champion because she, again, believed in the work that I did. She trusted me. There were lots of other things that we were working together on. So she saw my integrity and she saw that genuine character that I was bringing into the table. So using that kind of champion, and you can do this outside as well, right? If you have some project manager who really helps you out, or you could have a developer who's really supportive of the work that you're doing, make sure that you kind of get all of them to speak the same music or to sing the same song. And when that happens, that puts up a united front in front of somebody who is trying to push back on you. And that is basically building your champion, building your tribe, building your village, however you want to call it, and using them to use in these conflict resolution situations. All right, one more video here.
Good rule for couple conflict. Like, let's say I'm unhappy with you. So I come and tell you that. You can ask me, okay, what do you want? If I could give you what you wanted, what would it be? Well, I don't know. It's like, no, sorry. I cannot hit a target you won't specify. Let's discuss it at least. We got to have a target here. And so this is also if you're an employee. You got to know this if you're an employee. You're going to your boss with a problem. Why don't you go with the solution too? And if you're the sort of employee who goes to your boss with a solution, you'll racket yourself up the hierarchy. If you're in a halfway decent business, you'll ratchet yourself up the hierarchy so fast you can't believe it, because you'll get a reputation as the person who can solve the problem. This is another good rule for couple conflict.
So I hope all of you have actually tapped into that tip as well. Someone early on in my career gave me that tip. Whenever I go to my boss, don't just go with problems to them. People don't like hearing about problems all the time, but they want to hear something fresh, which is like, hey, I ran into this, but this is how we can turn things around. And this is a solution. Going back to the whole concept of the dopamine kick, right? You are telling them about a problem, but you're also telling them how to solve it, or at least a suggestion. And now you come across as a person who has a positive personality and someone who has a positive attitude to resolve something, rather than waddling in that same negative pool of like, oh, something is wrong, it never goes right, blah, blah, blah. And like the gentleman said, it's all about pushing yourself up about hierarchy, because at the end of the day, a leader is looking for solutions. A leader is looking for a way to progress. They're not really smothering themselves with problems all the time and thinking of, like, they talk about, I think it's a pessimist who has a problem for every solution and an optimist who has a solution for every problem, right? So I'm not necessarily going to group you into like optimist and pessimist here, but the real understanding here, or the differentiating factor here when you want to move up in your career ladder and your hierarchy, is how does your boss kind of view you? Are they able to see you as someone who can resolve things and open up things for the team to get things delivered? That's when you sort of become authoritative with influence and without authority, because at this point you are doing good for people rather than waiting for things to fall in their laps and just hoping that it would work fine or someone else will solve the problem for you. This is one thing that a lot of people grapple with, is imposter syndrome. Even today, someone was telling this, using this terminology with me at work. I was training them up for a new role. And they were basically like, I hope you are attending all the meetings, because for the next 1 month, I'm going to feel like an imposter syndrome because I don't really know what I'm talking about, even though I might actually know about it. Awareness of it is the first step, right? The more you are able to admit that, yes, I have a problem in terms of imposter syndrome because I know about it. I've been working in this industry for 20 years, but still when I walk into a room, I feel doubtful about myself. If you are creating an environment or you are in an environment that constantly makes you doubt yourself, a boss that's gaslighting you, or an organization that's not really supporting you for your needs, it will impact your performance. It will impact your confidence. It will impact your output. That goes without saying. But at the end of the day, if you are able to at least identify that, hey, there is a problem that's happening and I need to fix it, there are a few tips there. And I'm not going to go into too much depth here in terms of imposter syndrome, but at the end of the day, you fear what you don't know. So the more you document, this is where the part of my BA documenting nerd kind of comes in, because writing does a lot of good. It's not just about documenting requirements. In fact, there was research that basically said that people who actually take notes by writing rewire their neural pathways much better than someone who just types the notes in their laptop. So good luck to all of us, right? Because I've just been typing notes on my laptop whenever I go to meetings. And I wonder why I don't remember half of the things I wrote down. This is probably why. Because every time you're writing, there's that physical, tangible touch where your fingers are making the connection. It goes through your neural pathways and it's creating new connections in your brain. But when you're typing, it's the same action that is not necessarily giving you any feedback to what you're trying to do or build. So documenting, again, over here makes a huge difference. Why do you think people ask you to write journal when you're depressed? Why do you think people ask to write things down when you're confused? Why do you think people ask you to write things down when nothing seems to be fair in life, right? All these things are situations where fear overtakes us. All these things are situations where confusion overtakes us. But writing actually clears out those neural pathways. It establishes those connections that we're missing, and it helps us move towards a better direction. So documenting everything, having some sort of vision board in front of you and be like, okay, if I'm able to answer these questions, then it means that I know. And I need to keep telling myself that I'm not an imposter. I deserve to be at the table. I deserve to be in this room, right? Sharing your experiences and making yourself vulnerable in a professional way, right? You don't have to downplay yourself. You don't have to be like, oh my God, I'm so dumb and I don't know this, I don't know that. But really just talking about, hey, I've worked on this for the past 20 years, but with AI, so many things have changed. I'm willing to learn from the start. Tell me how I need to learn. Having that open attitude towards yourself and also other, being kind to yourself. That's one thing that we always overlook. If your best friend, your child, your better half, your parent, anyone else was going through imposter syndrome, we show so much kindness towards them. We're like, oh, don't worry, you're great, you're awesome. You know all this stuff. You just need to be prepared. But when the same thing happens to us, we bully ourselves in saying that, yeah, I must be dumb, right? I'm going to struggle. I don't know about this. We don't show the same level of kindness that we show to other people or other loved ones back to us. So that's really important in terms of understanding what you need to do to yourself and what you need to be overcoming imposter syndrome. And be factual about it, right? Write down all the knowledge gaps that you have. AI is a great tool now. Go into ChatGPT and just type in, hey, I'm a professional in the fintech area. Tell me all the key things that I should know. Look at all the key fintech companies out there and tell me what are some of the skill sets that they're asking for in the jobs that they're hiring for. Do you have those jobs? Upload your resume and ask AI to kind of tell you, hey, between this job and between my resume, where do you see skill gaps? Why do you think I won't get this job? And get some sort of help. I'm not saying AI is your be all end all, but this is the way you can start the research. And then of course you can go and talk to other people for coffee chats. I knew a guy who didn't come from a certain domain or background, but the next job that he applied to, I don't know how, but he ended up getting an interview for that role as well. And before that interview, all he did was for an entire week, he identified members in the team who were really good in that specific domain that he was interviewing for. And he took them for coffee chats, 5 coffee chats that week. And the next week he was ready for his interview. And this was before ChatGPT was a thing. So he must have done his research on Google, whatever questions to ask. But at the same time, he was supplementing that with experiential advice from all these people who are in that domain. So nothing is impossible. It's just a matter of being aware and taking steps to get there. And we BAs are really good at it because we love frameworks. We love jotting down things. We love process flows. And yet we don't apply any of that to ourselves when we're going into a situation. All right. And a quick video here as well.
Psychological truth that you must know. Sigmund Freud said this. The more perfect a person is on the outside, the more demons they have on the inside. Beware of people who seem too virtuous, who seem too good. They might be hiding something. And on the flip side, just remember somebody who's rough around the edges. Someone who's always not the absolute nicest. They might be your most loyal friend in time of need. I'll tell you.
So I know I went into a bit of like metaphysical kind of conversation there and things that are a little bit outside of stakeholder management. But if we go back to the previous video that talked about how you show up in a room and what your presence kind of means, what he's saying really resonates with that. It's not about being the best out there. You cannot be perfect every time, but it's all about being the best version that you can and being vulnerable about it in a smart way. You cannot know the answer to every question out there. Like I said, you might walk into a meeting and people might ask you questions that you might have no idea about. But instead of shying away from that interaction, how you handle that situation and how you deal with it makes all the difference in terms of how they see you and how they treat you and how they respect you and how you build your brand. So that's what makes a big difference in terms of the previous level versus the next level of interaction that you want to have with your stakeholders. And last but not the least, we are in the AI age. So we need to understand how we can do some of these things. And these are just some examples, and we'll go through a quick ChatGPT example as well. So the first one is predictive analytics. Back in the day, I used to work as a telemarketer as well as one of my summer jobs. And in sales, if you have worked in one of those jobs, they give you something called a negotiation checklist or like a Q&A checklist of some sort. So no matter what you hear on the other side of the call, there's something in that checklist for you to rebut that in trying to make that sale, right? And that's basically what this predictive analytics is really talking about. These days, a lot of calls take place over Zoom. You're able to record the information. If not, there are always meeting minutes that are circulated. There's someone who's taking all that information. Pop all that information as long as there's nothing that would betray any company information, any confidential information. You can actually create some sort of custom GPT that you upload it and you say, okay, I'm going to be presenting a new idea at this team meeting. Tell me what each of these stakeholders is potentially going to push back on, or what is their stand going to be, right? And let ChatGPT kind of do its magic and give you some insights into what it could be. Or you could even push that request in if you don't have any stakeholder information and ask ChatGPT, hey, I'm proposing this new idea. This is the deck that I have. What sort of questions do you think stakeholders will have? Tell me exactly what finance will be concerned with. Tell me exactly what legal would be concerned with. And go in prepared for some of these conversations, right? Going back to a couple slides before, we talked about BATNA, the best alternative that you can go in with. If you are more prepared with all the rebuttals that you need, the better your outcome is going to be because you actually have answers to all their questions. And perhaps this is also an opportunity for you to finesse what you're presenting even before you go in. So the questions that potentially could have come will not come anymore because you've handled that in your deck already. Sentiment analysis is a very common one, right? I worked in the call center environment now, and this is a very popular tool that customer contact centers use. Because as soon as the call comes in, depending on the words that the customer is using, depending on their tone, we're able to sense whether they're happy, unhappy, neutral. And then based on that, the agent is kind of informed, okay, you need to handle these questions very delicately because they're already pissed off. They are calling for the 6th time for the same issue. You need to be careful about what you're saying and so on and so forth. Then you've got automated information retrieval, and this is a big one, right? The more you can automate your SharePoint along with your AI, it's not going to be a simple document search, but you can actually have a more contextual search and saying, hey, I'm specifically looking for this document that had this. Sometimes when you're describing this to people, you'll be like, that deck had this one slide which had like blue arrows in there and it was showing what the previous state was, what the current state was. I can't remember which deck it was. And now maybe with ChatGPT, if you explain what it is, it will be able to pull that file for you. In terms of conflict resolution, again, early warning signs. One of the things that I really liked about the predictive analytics, the meeting recording part, is that you can actually identify which stakeholders don't really speak up during meetings. It gives you a percentage of how many people spoke and how many people didn't speak. And if you feel that some person has been quiet the whole time, this is an opportunity for you to catch up with them afterwards and make sure that they don't have any issues, because they'll just wait until the end when the project is about to be implemented and be like, no, we can't go ahead because there's a problem here, right? We all have run into that sort of stakeholders as well who don't really participate, but they shut down the project at the last minute. So what are some of the other things? And the other example that I gave you, which was like finding what sort of risk exposures have happened in this domain, right? So if you're trying to do a credit card migration or something, tell me what sort of risks I need to be worried about and what's the cost of the risk that happened along with that issue. Now you're going in prepared when you're having these conversations with your stakeholders. Data-driven negotiation insights, very similar to what I mentioned about earlier. If you're a salesperson, you had the Q&A in terms of whatever people ask for. You can drive this with your stakeholder transcripts as well and kind of see who's going to push back. What is it that they like? What is it that they don't like? And last but not the least, risk identification and mitigation. This is a big one. Every time I go into a meeting, I'm just like, okay, this is what I'm going to be proposing. This is the agenda. What do you think the questions would be like? And then I just get a rough idea of, okay, I get the picture and what I need to talk about, and then I go better prepared in the session. All right, with this, I want to pivot over to a ChatGPT example here. And this is a very generic example. I didn't put any company information, but here I'm calling myself a project manager. But even if you are a business analyst, what you can do is you go in, and BRICS is actually very similar to like the North American Council that we have, but this is on the other side of the planet. And I wanted to kind of understand, hey, I'm going to be talking or bringing renewable technologies to certain countries that are part of this. And given the political and historical stance on some of these things, give me how these leaders are going to react, right? What is going to be their topmost rebuttal, refusal? What will actually help me influence them? What sort of political leanings do they have? So of course, I've taken a very generic example because there'll be a lot of information about stakeholders publicly available. In this case, I took this example, but you can do the same thing with your internal stakeholders as well. And you'll have to upload some transcripts and files as long as it's, part of your company policy. Make sure you're following your company policy, and kind of see what the system spits out. So over here, you can see like who would be the hardest sell. So if it's Russia, you're going to have a lot of problem, but and Iran, if you have a lot of problem there too. But these might be your conditional buyers. So there are some people who are right in the middle. They won't really oppose you, but at the same time, they're not going to support you either. And then these are the people who would be most receptive. So based on their previous behavior and how they have been in the public space, this is what the system is telling me. And then country by country talking points. So for each stakeholder, what are the things that they're going to refuse based out of? And what they might accept. So if you were to turn the requirement a certain way, what is it that they would say okay to? And what would your counter be, right? So when they refuse, how will you tell them that, no, this is how we need to proceed? And they had this for every stakeholder in the picture here. And extra ammunition in saying that, hey, these are some of the other stats that you should think about and make sure that we are able to get through for this proposal. And this also gives you some additional, of course, this is all a lot of political jargon here, so don't get tied into it, but just think about like the titles that it's actually giving us. Deal design. So how do you actually set up your contract? So if you're working with multiple vendors and you really want to understand like this, should this be a one-time payment? Should this be a subscription model? Should this be some other sort of fixed contract that you're looking for? You will be able to kind of identify that with ChatGPT as well in terms of what sort of best alternative there would be. Next, if you want to go into a bit of neuroscience techniques as well, because I usually do, you leverage some of their personalities and see how we can create some sort of better diplomacy with each other, especially if you're leading without authority, because you're not the president of any country, but you need to go in and convince all these people to make sure that they are supporting what you need to do. So again, you've got plenty of information about these people publicly available, right? So this is kind of giving you the Brazilian leader is a social visionary, and these are the reasons why. And what is this neural lever? Look at this insight here. It actually tells you what is it that triggers him or what is it that he's passionate about. So if you were to position your proposal as a social reward, he's probably going to be more supportive of this idea versus not, right? And what would be the right diplomatic tactic over here? And what are some of the influence moves that you can do here in terms of changing his mindset towards something? You've got Russia, and then you've got what is their lever? That's like basically amygdala and threat security. So this is someone who comes in with a lot of like ego, They like being pleased about themselves. They like that people-pleasing type of personality, someone who worships them. And again, use ego-soothing technique languages, right? So this person likes a lot of boosting, self-image boosting. So that's what you're using. And you're framing the deal as increasing resilience against Western sanctions. So pick the point that really drives the point for them and take that piece and amplify that. And that's when you can get them to be on your side. So those are examples of like different leaders there. And then some universal neuroscience techniques as well that you can apply. Mirror neurons, right? So you are slowly trying to build your presence here. So when we talk about subtly mirroring posture, tone, and you're building unconscious trust. So these are people who want to work with other people who are like them. So this is where we were talking about having similar values, right? Creating a common ground when we think about the Wharton framework. What happens when you're able to kind of reflect that with them? Scarcity and loss aversion. So some people are very risk avoidant. So if that's the case, what is the thing that you need to bring to the table here? Anchoring their bias. So whenever you go in for a negotiation, this is a rule, right? Say you're buying a car, you're going to ask them for the lowest possible price. You yourself know it's a bad price, but you would still ask for that because you know that whole negotiation is going to take place and you're going to meet somewhere in the middle. So you don't want to start off too high because then they will not go down any further beyond that. Same thing when you are asking for salaries for a new job. You're like, what's your expected salary? You want to make sure that you are meeting whatever you need at the minimum threshold because they would want to pay the lowest and you want to go the highest. So understanding some of these techniques. So anchor that in a way like this is the worst possible we can do and then start giving them better situations so they accept what you're doing. Identity priming, so tying it to their image. This is the whole ego-soothing concept, right? Obviously, these people are in power, so they enjoy being in power. They enjoy being that personality. So how can you tap into that? And last but not the least, social proof as well. So when you kind of create that peer mentality, the whole thing about, the peer pressure that we went through, you're like, oh, Sophie did this and my favorite person is Sophie, so I got to do this too, right? So kind of building that social pressure around them the way internet and social media is doing today as well, right? I don't know if you guys remember the ice bucket challenge that happened a few years back. It was for ALS. And it was sort of like you would pour this bucket of ice on your head and then you would tag someone else. And now they have to do it as well because social pressure. It's a nice thing to do, right? The next one is based on the archetypes. Which leader can I leverage or work with to influence? So this is your power and influence grid as well to kind of understand, okay, if this person accepts, this is building your tribe, building your base, right? Like all the people who can be evangelists to what you're trying to do. So if I convince one person, how many people can that person kind of convince? So over here, you've got, China, and then who can they sway? They can sway Russia, Iran, South Africa, and Egypt. So all these are leaders who might be swayed if China changes its position on what they need to do. If we're talking about India, he has got a few people that he can sway as well. And each of them have that, right? And with that, you also have this concept of triad. Like if you want to find the minimum possible set of stakeholders who will kind of cover most of your stakeholder base, this will be sort of your triad. That's what it's showing. So you've got Xi, Modi, and Lula, these three people. If you kind of convince the three of them, then basically your entire stakeholder support will be covered because they would be your influential triad. And last but not the least, I basically asked, give me something that's visual so I can kind of absorb it better. And the size is very small, but I'll be sharing the link to this as well so you guys can take a look at it yourself. But you can see like it shows you the distance, meaning Ethiopia and Saudi Arabia kind of have similar values, but the distance is very far away, right? But you can see that someone like, let's take another example, Saudi Arabia and UAE, you can see that they're not connected. So it's not like they have some sort of an influence connection there, but you can see that their values are really close, right? So in data analytics, there's this concept called K-means and clustering. And this is similar to that sort of a scenario, which basically shows like this group of data is very similar to each other in certain set of values. So that's basically what this is showing. So AI can sort of help you in some of these scenarios in terms of finding things out as to how you want to deal with your stakeholders. And last, I think this is my last slide just to reiterate some of the key takeaways. Map the ecosystem. Just try to do a lot of research about people. They are different, but at the same time, there's a lot of information out there that you can use, like the same way we do for interviews, right? We go on LinkedIn, we talk to other people who are connected to them. We try to find out about their company. We try to find out about their department. Not very different. Now you're within the company itself. So talk to people who work with them. Navigate competing priorities. Just find creative ways to get around this. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be part of your job. It's going to be a difficult thing to get out of. So just learn to get better at that. And the more you throw yourself in these situations, the better you're going to get at it. Apply neuroscience. This is just my takeaway because I enjoy neuroscience. But the more you try to understand the person or strive to understand who they are with empathy, that's going to give you better results. And last but not the least, try to peel yourself away from that traditional mindset of influencing with power, influencing with authority, because the world is moving in a different direction, which is influencing without authority and kind of understanding the other person rather than just governing with fear. I'm happy to link with you folks on LinkedIn if you're interested, and that is a QR code for a survey as well. So I thrive on feedback because I'm trying to improve myself as well. In fact, this version that you're seeing is probably the fourth or fifth version of this deck that I've built, and it's been built with a lot of feedback from people and like pilots that I do with my team members and folks that I know. So any feedback that you can provide me would be welcome. And with that, let's open up for questions.
Thanks, Banu, for the insightful, update that you've shared. Before we proceed, would like anyone that has questions to feel free to, put on your camera or raise up your hand, and you can go ahead and ask questions. Or if you want to drop it, you can also drop it on the chat. So.
Do you think people will be more open to questions if we stop recording, Ola? I'm not sure what the procedure is, but I just thought I'll put it out there too.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Hi.
You're very inspiring. I missed the beginning of your meeting because I was driving home from work. Sorry.
That's okay.
You're very inspiring, and I'm wondering how you got into government and how you transitioned over there, or did you study poli-sci and then just go straight into it?
No, so my job was actually in the technical department in the government. So I used to work with the Ontario Provincial Ministry, and I worked in their strategy and innovation branch. I think that's what it was called at the time. But they were working on a technology solution, and I was a product manager for that. So I didn't go into poli-science, although after I started that job, I was like, I should go into this because it's super fascinating. When they think about the pros and cons, and they have these debates about what works well. And I used to be in debating society back in school. So it just brought out the nerd in me, but that's how I kind of worked in government. So I unfortunately did not work on the policy side of things, but I had enough exposure to that because they were my stakeholders in the tool that I was working, but super fascinating area because lots of human science there, lots of neuroscience, psychology, and social psychology as well that plays into it.
Definitely. So then you just applied online. You just went to the government of
Yeah,
Ontario?
at the time, yes. I was actually in a contract role with them. So it wasn't like a direct hire, but they were looking for contractors for like a fixed term project. And that's how I got in.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing with us. I actually have to tell you just some immediate feedback that this is the first seminar that I've been in for a long time where I got many things out of it and useful. And I could just listen to you and learn. And I love it. And I hope that IIBA could have more of this and all of the different groups that we attend as BAs. I really think you should spread yourself around more because you're right. This is the way things are. I try to manage collaboratively, and I don't have authority as a contractor in my contracts and on my projects. And I totally believe in so many things you're saying. And I'd love to hear more about what you have to say. So thanks for sharing your time tonight. That was really sweet.
Thank you so much, Natasha. That was a stellar review. Thank you. As you can see, I'm grinning from side to side.
Session. Like we mentioned, the recording will be available, and we would also be sharing. Banu had confirmed that she would also be able to share the slides, so we will be able to also pass that to everyone. Before we round up the session, we'd just like to share some of the chapter news on some of the upcoming events that we have. We have our study session coming up on the 10th of March, and there we'll be reviewing the chapter 3 for our CBAP preparation class, and that will be handled by our instructor, Professor Ozam. Apart from that, we have another speaker event coming up in 2 weeks' time that we'll be co-hosting with the South Florida chapter, and that will be on the 19th of March. And on the 2nd of April, the IIB Vancouver chapter will be celebrating the 20th anniversary. So we'll be having a social event at the Inches Baboon Garden in Surrey. It's going to be an in-person session. So we are inviting everyone that has, participated with us, attended any of our events, just to come around, it's not just going to be a social event. We would also have opportunities to learn from one another. So I have dropped a chat. I've dropped in the chat the link to the survey. Please, we can feel free to pick up and complete the survey just to let us know how this session has gone. And yeah, so thanks once again for everyone joining this call. Let me see if Sid is on the call. Okay, we don't have Sid on the call, so I guess we will be calling it to a close at this point in time. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks, Banu, and expect further updates on the video and the slides in the coming days. Thank you, everyone.